Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we're back in War Thunder, and recently there have been some new changes to the BRs of certain vehicles, mainly two tanks or ground vehicles. The only one, and I'm going from a realistic point of view here, so if I don't mention arcade or simulator, that's basically why. But the only aircraft changes that we have for realistic is the BE6, which is going from 5.3 to 5.0. So not really a big change. To be honest, I haven't really seen any of them around the place. I've seen a few when I ran into Bowtime and his crew in some of the matches when the update first came out. But that was about it. I heard it had some bugs. Hopefully they've been fixed. You tell me if you think the BE6 is in a good position. To be quite honest, I just don't know. But overall, there have been a lot of changes to mainly high-tier stuff in tanks. And if you want to have a look at the high-tier stuff, there is an easily readable chart, which I found on the War Thunder Reddit. There will be a link in the description with this chart, and also with the forum post talking about talking about all of the changes. There's also some others, so this is from Stoner. Until the 26th of the 10th, 2017, when purchasing the Jagdpanzer 4.5 and the Rakuten Jagdpanzer 2, it will not be necessary to purchase the previous Sturemil SPG. It will be possible to continue the research of the Jagdpanzer 4.5 when it moves to the new branch if the research has already begun in its original position. So there you go. If you're researching it now, and it gets moved to the other tree, which, you know, it's getting moved to, then you can still research it. Whether you can buy it or not is a different question, since I found with the T54 I had to grind out the whole T44-100 before I was able to purchase that thing, which is kind of an annoying thing that is in the game, but it is how it is. So first of all, we're going to be talking about some of the lower tier changes, which may affect some of you guys playing at mid tiers, and then we're going to move on to the hot sauce, which is rank 6. So the first few vehicles which have been changed are some of the Panzer IIIs. So the Panzer IIIe and the Panzer IIIF. We have the Panzer IIIe going from 2 to 1.7, and the Panzer IIIF going from 2.3 to 2. So a BR decrease of 0.3. Now, at lower tiers, if you look at Germany, at least in my experience, the Panzer IV kind of reigns supreme around that level. It has the short-barreled 75, which has access to APHE and also access to heat rounds, which are just wonderful rounds to use. Very low velocity, very much feels like a howitzer, but if you hit something, you know it's gonna die. With the Panzer IIIs, they have the 50mm, which, you know, is still pretty good, but it doesn't have the stopping power of something like the short-barreled 75. And now when you go up the ranks and you run into stuff like the Panzer IIIM and you compare it to the Panzer IV F2, the main advantage of the main advantage of the 50mm at that stage is its penetration, but also the fact that it has a really good reload. At the lower BR brackets, the Panzer IV has a very, very short reload. So with the short-barreled 75, the reload doesn't really make that much a difference if you're comparing it to the 50mm. So maybe with these BR decreases for these Panzer IIIs, maybe they come back into action and we see them as the main tank over the Panzer IVs, but I really highly doubt it. I think the game will still stay Panzer IV focused around that tier just because of the effectiveness of the lower BR Panzer IVs. The M24 is also getting BR decrease, the Japanese one as well, from 3.7 to 3.3. I think this is a good change, because the Chaffee, you never really saw it in battle, and if you did, it was the Japanese one, and it was getting torn apart. And the basic reason for this is because it has no armor, its gun stability on the move is not very good, even though it's quite nippy. You have to stop to shoot, otherwise the 75mm is bouncing all over the place. And when you compare its speed to some other vehicles at that BR, it's not that much different, and also it has a pretty bad stock grind. So therefore, it's kind of nice to see that it's been dropped in BR. I think you could even put it at like 2.7 or 3.0 and it would still be, you know, exactly the same. The main issue with it is the gun handling. The gun handling just isn't good on it, or good enough. And because it's still quite a large tank compared to something like the M22, it can't get away with like going quickly around the map. And it really doesn't have the armor to be able to do that as well. Also, how the crew is situated. It's a very small compartment inside, and therefore once it gets hit and everything dies in it. The M24 is just one of those tanks that's never really going to fit the meta unless it gets its gun handling characteristics changed, and it might do eventually, but right now it hasn't, so therefore a lower BR does suffice. Moving on to the M4A3105. So the M4A3105 was a monster on release, and it was kind of hilarious. You could take it into 5.7 battles, kill tigers with it, because of its HE shell and also its heat shell. You could also pop panthers very easily, so it was one of those really fun like tanks you would take into higher BRs just to donk someone and just to basically donk on them and be like, hey, you know, get fucked kind of thing. Unfortunately, when they made the HE change, they'd already raised the 105's BR, and because of that, they basically increased its BR and decreased its killing power. So they gave it a good old 1-2 punch, basically making it useless. It also has a very long reload for the gun that it has now, and therefore decreasing its BR now, I can understand why they've done it. It has lost its destructive power, so therefore dropping it means that it'll face stuff which is slightly worse, therefore maybe the destructive power does come back a little bit. I really do miss those days of popping Panther turrets though. Hopefully we get that back at some point. The T26-4 is getting dropped to 1 from 1.3. The issue with the T26-4 is the same issue with the other T26. It's always going to be worse than the BT series of tanks, so even putting it at like, even if we got like a 0 BR and putting it at that, people would still use the BT as their first tank, or at least, you know, players who were, you know, new to the game and they kind of understand tank warfare, they would go for the BT straight away. So yeah, it's nice to have a big gun at BR1, but it's not really going to get used that much. I kind of enjoyed it when it was first out, especially at higher BRs, because you could hide in a bush and then fire at an enemy somewhere. But it's definitely an arcade vehicle and not really a realistic one. Now the Matilda Mark II has actually been lowered in BR, so it's now 2.7. This means if it does get down-tiered, its armor may actually mean something, unless it runs into the Germans with the heat shells, which pen ridiculous amounts, to be honest. So the Matilda Mark II with its 40mm does get dropped. The other Matilda with the 76 stays where it is, and I think that's completely fine. The Mark II at 2.7, it will be more usable, but it'll still have issues. Now, it makes it a little harder to build a thing around it, like a decent lineup. Will it ever be a primary tank? I mean, probably not. I've talked about the Matilda in the past and all of its issues that it has, but maybe. Maybe if it gets dropped to like 2-3, then yeah, there's an opportunity for it to come through. At least it'll be more usable now. The Valentine Mark IX has dropped from 3.3 to 3, so it's higher than the Matilda still, meaning that if you wanted to create a lineup with the Valentine Mark IX and the Matilda Mark II, then you would have to run it at 3 anyway, so there's no real difference there for the Matilda. The Valentines have the issue of the fakeness of armor, I think I would call it, or the illusion of armor. So a lot of people believe that they are decently armored, maybe from what they've read in historical books or something like that, but in the game the armor is really terrible. And also the Valentine suffers from the fact that it's quite slow, so therefore you have to depend on the gun. And from the gun, you get a solid shot, which, you know, is okay. It's not the end of the world, it's pretty useful, but it does not really do enough damage. And the Mark IX has the issue, if I'm thinking of the right one. Yeah, the Mark IX is the one with the 57mm, so it has a 5-second reload, which is pretty good. compared to the Mark 11 with the 75, but it still struggles with the fact that you have to shoot the gunner 5 times in the face. Or maybe you're lucky and you only have to shoot him 4 times in the face. So great penetration, decent reload, but it doesn't really do a lot. And with the armor not backing you up, and with the gun not doing as much as you wanted to, then yeah, it's a sorry situation for the Valentine. At the same time, if you pop the turret, then it's out of action, like it's completely gone. And one of the advantages that is never really brought up, but is a big one, especially for something like a Panzer IV F2, is the fact that it has 5 crew. So if you pop the turret, there's still 2 guys in there, and especially if you're firing AP, it's going to take you a while to kill them. But yeah, maybe it won't run into so many Panzer IV F2s, maybe it'll run into more Panzer IV F1s or Panzer III J1s and do a little bit better, but I don't think it will ever be a fully usable vehicle. Just looking at the lineup with the Matilda, you could actually make a comparable one. Matilda Mark II, Crusader Mark III, and AC Mark II AA. I would actually say that's pretty good. You could throw in the Premium Grant if you have it. Yeah, that's actually not a bad lineup. So, yeah, maybe the Matilda might have a bit of hope instead of having to stick it with that 75 Valentine. We'll have to see in the future how it goes. What else has been changed? Obviously the Japanese chassis has been changed, but that's pretty much it for lower tier stuff. Oh, the Churchill Mark 1 got lowered from 3.3 to 3. I don't think it really needed it. I seem to be in the minority with the Churchill Mark 1, but I think it's a really usable machine. It has 80mm of pen on its 40. Yeah, if you run into 4.3 tanks, it can be kind of annoying. But everything around its BR, especially stuff like Panzer IV F2s, it can deal with. It now has a smoke grenade for its 76.2, so it's actually useful. A smoke shell. And it also gets smoke grenades. So it's got some buffs, let's say, in update 1.71. And it's still... I enjoy it. I think angled correctly, its armor is completely feasible. Maybe not against the long-barreled 75, but you do need something to be able to penetrate it. It's really good against the Russians, pretty good against the Americans. It struggles against the Germans, but everything does at this BR because of the long-barreled 75. And dropping it to 3.0 won't change that, it will still just face them all day. But I didn't think it needed a BR drop, to be honest. I think it was, you know, fine where it was. So anyway, that's pretty much all the low-tier stuff. So we'll move, I think that's all of the low-tier stuff. So let's move on to the higher-tier stuff. We'll start off with the Stur Emil. So the Stur Emil is getting dropped from 6.0 to 5.7. This means that you can use it at a 5.7 lineup, which is pretty strong for Germany. The Tiger E, the Panther D, and you can chuck in the Stur Emil. You also have the Waffenträger at 5.7, the Nashorn at 5.3, and the Dicker at 4.3. All machines which are useful at that BR of 5.7. If you only have the Dicker and you don't have the other two, or maybe you prefer the Dicker is a wonderful machine with 200mm of penetration. The issue with the Stur Emil has never been its BR, it's just how it is. How can I describe this? It does have a really good shell, of 220mm and then 240mm, but the thing is, with machines like the Stur Emil, they have a very, very designated playstyle. So, it has really good gun depression, so you're going to sit it behind a hill, you're going to wait for somebody to come over said next hill, or, come over the plane, you're going to pop up, use the gun depression and shoot the guy, and then you're going to pop back down and keep doing it again. They've even added tracks to it to try and give it some more armor. But it doesn't have a turret, so it can't turn very well. So even though its gun depression is good, you're going to have to shift the whole machine. It's an incredibly slow machine, because it only has a 274 horsepower engine. And at the same time, it's going to get strafed by aircraft and all of this. You basically have just a big gun, and that's it. So you could put this thing at 3.0, and it would still perform the same. Because its armor of, not including the tracks, of 50mm on the front, yeah, you could stick it at 3.0 and it would have the same issues. You could swap like this with like the Sturmpanzer. What's the Sturmpanzer at nowadays? Maybe not 2.3. Let's just say 3.0. Swap it with the Marder 3H. It would perform exactly the same because it's just how it is in the game. It has a very specific playstyle and that doesn't fit the meta. You're going to see... it's also massive. So let's compare it to another new vehicle that just got added. The Waffenträger, which I will eventually do a review on. I'm just trying to mod it out right now. So the Waffenträger is at 5.7. So these things are going to be of comparable BR. They both have awful engines. The Waffenträger is slightly quicker because it's a hell of a lot lighter than the Sturmil. The Sturmil is 36.5 ton. The Waffenträger is only 16. The gun on the Waffenträger is the 88 you find on the Tiger II. The Sturmil is the 128K40, which is basically the same gun you find on the Jagdtiger, slightly smaller, but the same caliber. The difference is the Waffenträger is incredibly small and quite hard to see, especially if it's covered in bushes. The Sturmil is a house, so therefore you're always going to take the Waffenträger. The Waffenträger also has a turret. It can get hull broken, where I'm pretty sure the Sturmil can't, but it doesn't really matter, because once you're hitting the Sturmil, you're basically dead anyway. Yes, you can retreat, but how many crew have you lost? And you only have, of course, one loader. Once he's dead, your stock reload speed is 23.6 seconds. If he dies, it's way over 30. The Waffenträger, it's sat at 10.3 right now in my crew, and the crew that I have it in is not that good. So yeah, it's one of those vehicles which just doesn't fit the game. Like, the Dicker you can make an argument for because its reload isn't as bad as the Sturmil, and it has that minus 15 gun depression again, and it's a little bit more nippy, so yeah, you can see how it can work. Also with its armor is 30 on the front, but it can be extraordinarily good for some reason because the breach gets in the way a lot of the time. But the Sturmil, you're never going to pick it over the Waffenträger. So to make it viable, you would have to drop it to either 5.3 or 5.0, and people hardly use the Nashorn anyway. And then people would just use the Dicker Max. So it's just going to be one of those machines which is going to get, you know, put around in BR and nothing's really going to be done about it. It's just going to be sat around not doing anything the whole time and nobody's going to take it. Especially at 5.7, when you already have two very good tanks, the Tiger E and the Panther D. This is the question I always bring up with machines like this. So I run a 3-vehicle lineup in ground forces, which I think is the general one that people use. 3 ground vehicles, 2 aircraft. Some may do 4 ground vehicles and 1 aircraft. Some may buy crews so they have more. But let's say you run the 3. I am going to run a heavy, a medium, or 2 mediums, and an AA. The reason for that is if I get killed quickly in my heavy or medium, and maybe I've done okay in the heavy, or maybe I've captured a point, I have something to spawn in, which is the AA. If, for me, to add one of these tanks in, I either have to replace my secondary tank, which in this case would be the Panther D, or I have to replace the AA, meaning if I don't do well in my primary tank, which does happen a decent bit because I'm not that great of a tanker, then I wouldn't have that secondary spawn to help out my team. So maybe if you're a more skilled player, you would put the Sturmil in, but then you have to go, well, why wouldn't I take the Waffenträger? And then you would go, well, I should take the Waffenträger, because it has a turret and a comparable gun. So even then, like, even at 5.7, I really doubt you'll see the damn thing, because there's too many good machines already there that it's competing against. The next one is the Bulldog. Both American and Japanese Bulldog have been dropped to 6.0 from 6.3, I believe. This just means that it would have to be top tier in your lineup, because there's nothing else at 6.0 that I can see. Oh, the 76 Jumbo. So actually that could work. So you run the 76 Jumbo, the Bulldog, and then you run like the M19 if you feel like it, or the Slugger, the M36. I would personally like to run it with the T25 because I think it's more useful than the 76 Jumbo, but at least it's a bit more, you know, comparable. You don't have to run it with the Pershing, which is just a depressing lineup to run at 6.3. 6.3 is one of those BRs where you just have to understand you're gonna be up tiered to 6.7 or 7.0 every time. You're never gonna get down tiered. Maybe you every so often get into a 5.3 match with the Hellcats and the 76 Shermans, but it's not gonna happen a lot, and you're gonna have to carry. The Bulldog's issue is that same issues that it had in real life. Underpowered and too big. If you talk to like Rex or Tazzy or look at the files on the Bulldog, it just wasn't good enough for its desired goal. It was supposed to be kind of this scout reconnaissance vehicle, but they made a huge tank with a massive engine. So scouting in it, the issue with scouting in it is that the enemy would hear the engine a mile away. And at the same time, it was very, very tall and very, very big and had pretty much no armor on it. The only saving grace it has in game right now is its Sabo shot, which penetrates 232mm. Now, I've had very mixed results with this Sabo shot. Sometimes, obviously, it pens, hits ammunition and blows stuff up. Other times, it doesn't do anything. So, yeah, it's just one of those tanks. Putting it at 6.0 means that you can create a cool lineup with it. And 6.3 is pretty much a dead BR in my opinion. Same with the Pershing. I mean, you could put the Pershing at 6.0 and it would be pretty much the same. It's kind of interesting with the Bulldog though. It definitely needed some kind of change, whether it was like give it some add-on armor or something like that. Maybe give it a bit of an engine boost, but you know, they've decided to drop its BR. The Hurry prototype has been increased to 6.3. I don't really have a lot of thoughts about that. If you want to know about the Hurry prototype and how it fits in the game, I recommend the video from yesterday, which was with Tiger Frost. He talked in length about its strengths and weaknesses and stuff. It's a very good video, and therefore go and watch that. The Type 61 has been dropped to 6.7. Oh, great. The Japanese are saved. The the Type 61 is pretty much the pattern for the, well, it's actually it's the Japanese tall pattern. It is not going to be useful at 6.7. It's not useful at 7.0. Its saving grace, just like a lot of these vehicles, is the fact that it has Heat FS. Heat FS is really good on it. The Heat FS is only a rank 2 upgrade, so you know, grinding through it isn't too bad. But it's a huge vehicle once again with no armor on it. It's going to get outdone by a lot of the heavy tanks it faces. At 6.7, at least you can make a nice lineup with it. The Type 60 SPRG and the M42 Duster come into you know, territory, and you can use it. Oh, also the 6.0 Bulldog now for the Japanese. It has no lineup for it. Before, you could run it with the STA1, STA2, and the Hori prototype. Now with the Hori going up and the Bulldog going down, yeah, you literally can't run a lineup with it. You'd have to run the heavy tank number 6, the Tiger E, and the 6.0, and then if you wanted an AA, the Soki. But they do need to fill that gap with something when it comes to the AA. But yeah, I don't really have a lot of thoughts on the Type 61. It seems like the STB one and the Type 74 are good tanks. But the Type 61s that I've seen in game, if they're using Heat FS, they seem pretty good. If they're not using Heat FS, they seem pretty bad. Pretty much the same issue that the M47 has in the game right now at 7.3. But obviously, dropping to 6.7, maybe it makes it a bit more useful. At least it doesn't have to face the buffed armor of the Tiger 2s. T95 is going up to 7.0. Really don't think that's needed. The T95 was an interesting machine at 6.7, I believe it was. I mean, 6.7 for the Americans is pretty crowded. And yeah, the T95 is going up to from 6.7 to 7.0. I mean, it does mean you can create a good 7.0 lineup. I mean, you got the M46 with the Heat FS, the T32 and the T95, if you're confident without running an AA. So yeah, there's that, but you could do that anyway. since it's at 6.7. Its gun on the T95 isn't actually that good. What makes it stand up is its armor. Because its gun, it pens at most 315, 250 on the AP round, which is nice. The APC-BC round at 219. Yeah, that's not really good enough to be used. But the frontal armor was always the thing that kept it in the game. This is an extremely slow vehicle, which is easy to flank. It doesn't have great gun depression. It literally, all it has is its front. And therefore, I don't really think it needs to be up tiered, because now it's just going to face Heat FS, which is just going to hit those flat parts next to the gun, and it's going to get eaten alive. Also, why not put up the T28? The T28 right now is at 6.3, by the way, in Tank Realistic. So I don't know why they haven't put that up. That seems kind of a little bit of an oversight. They are pretty much the same vehicle. But anyway, I don't think that was required. The Jagdpanzer 4.5 has been dropped to 7.0, or is going to be, I should say. Obviously, these changes haven't come in yet. A lot of people have been talking about why is the RU-251 at 6.7 and the Jagdpanzer 4.5 at 7.3. Because obviously they have the same gun. The RU-251's pretty much better in every single way, and they have a complete point. Now, what I would have done is I would have up-tiered the RU-251 to 7.3 and put the Jagdpanzer 4.5 at 6.7, pretty much just change them around. Because I think the RU-251, as I've said before in one of the replays I did, it has an incredibly high skill ceiling, and if you have like 4 of them in a squad of really good players, they're just going to take over the game, and there's nothing you're going to be able to do against this. Even though it doesn't have a lot of armor, just go and I need to find a replay of a squad of 4 of them in really, really good players' hands, and they just decimate. They own the game at 6.7. So yeah, I would have put it at 6.7. At 7.0, it's nice to see it dropped. This means that it's pretty much competing with the Jag Tiger. I mean, at 7.0 you can already make a really good lineup for the German. Oh, not really good, but pretty good. So Panther 2, 105 Tiger 2, Kugel Blitz. That's a pretty solid lineup in my opinion. Kugel, not the greatest AA, but really fun to use. Panther 2, I think is still a really good tank with the 88mm. The 105 can be incredibly sketchy with its gun. It's one of those tanks where you fire and you're like, I have 250mm of penetration. How did I bounce there? Also, you know, it can be a little bit of a troll cannon sometimes. But I think overall it's a good machine with the 20-second reload stock on it. But yeah, you could already make a nice 7.0 lineup. So if you want to change your Kugel for a tank destroyer, if you are confident in the Panther 2 or the Tiger 2, then yeah, at least you get that option. I mean, you could already do that in the Jag Tiger, but I suppose, do you want armor and a big gun, or do you want a Heat FS gun and a little bit of speed behind you? You have a little bit of a choice now, and I'm guessing the Jagdpanzer 4.5 wasn't really used that much, so therefore they're just pushing it down. There's also the Hesh nerf, which kind of affects it, but it's got rank 2 Heat FS, so that shouldn't be too hard to get. So maybe we see a few more of them in there. It's actually quite a small tank as well, which means that it can hide in some interesting places in Realistic. I don't think people will take it over stuff like the Panther 2, but at least it has a chance of actually being seen now, compared to before at 7.3, because it didn't really have a place in the game. It didn't really fit properly, so I think that's a good change. Now, at 7.3, the IS-6 has been bumped up. So the IS-6 is one of those very contentious issues with the community. I never really saw an issue with it. The only issue I saw is if I was in 6.0 vehicles facing it, which is definitely a problem. But I think that's down to BR compression or the vehicle itself. It's getting bumped up to 7.3, which means that it is along the likes of its brothers, the IS-3 and the SU-122-54, which is, you know, okay. It just means that now you can't make a nice IS-6 lineup. At 7.0, you could run it with the T-44-100, you could run it with the SU-100P if you felt like it, and yeah, pretty much as simple as that, which is, you know, it's good enough. You could also run it with some interesting planes at 7.0. Let's just see. The MiG-9 and the MiG-9L I think are pretty cool. You could also run it with the TU2s, but you know, that's not BR specific, so it doesn't really matter too much. At 7.3, it means that there are no 7.3 aircraft, so you'd still have to run it with the same stuff. And also your ground lineup gets buggered. Like, because you've got to remember, the T-54 1947, which is at 7.3 right now, is actually getting up tiered to 7.7, so we'll talk about that in a second. So at 7.3, you run it with the SU-12254. If you want it to be top tier, you can't throw in the ZSU-57-2, so you really don't have a good AA at 7.3. You can still toss in the 906, I think that's a good vehicle. And you can also run it with the BMP, if you have that unlocked yet. So you can make an okay lineup, but it's definitely not as strong as the 701 at its BR. And at 7.3, that means it misses those 6.0 stuff. So a lot of 6.0s are now going to get more down tiered into 5.7s, or you know, only have to hit 6.7s. I think a lot of the 6.7s are still going to run into a lot of 7.3s now, because it's not like the IS-6's popularity is going to go down. It just means that maybe you get up-tiered more into stuff you don't want to fight even more. So yeah. It's an interesting change. Will it fix the issue that people have? No. No, it won't. I think the IS-6 is just going to be a plague that people complain about constantly. Which, you know, I'm not saying whether it's justified or not. For me personally, I think it's fine. But then again, I play British tanks, and Sabo is great against it. I can understand from an American point of view, you want to get the Heat FS added, but you only have the M46, and maybe it's not as accurate as other certain tanks. So yeah, maybe you have an issue with that. Putting it up to 7.3 is fine in my opinion. It kind of sucks that you can't run it with a nice lineup, but yeah, that's the issue. 7.7, we actually have 4 changes. So the STB1 gets down tiered to 7.7 from 8.0. Not going to comment too much on that because, to be honest, I don't really know how it does. The only thing I've heard about it is that it's positive, which is good. The Leopard 1 gets down tiered as well to 7.7. Now, the Leopard 1, I think it's kind of justified with getting dropped. The reason for this is that it doesn't have a stabilizer. Its HESH is not as good as it was before. The rangefinder, unless you unlock it, is kind of iffy. It does still have good Heat FS and good Sabo. But one of the strengths of the Leopard is at the start of the match, being able to use its engine, getting into a position, and being able to basically hold that position and pop out when needed, shoot, pop back. And the fact that the Leopard 1 doesn't have a stabilizer means that it's harder to do this compared to at least the Leopard 1A1. The other stuff that's at this BR that is comparable, you have the M48, the M103 and the M60, all of the T-54s, the Object 120, the IS-4M. You only have the Falcon for the for the British, and the STB-1. So I think it fits in this bracket, because if you look at the other brackets, like if you go up a bracket to 8.0, you're running into the T95E1, which doesn't have a stabilizer, so that's fine, the T62, the Chieftain Mark III, and the Type 87, which is the Gepard for the Japanese. So you're basically looking at the T62 and the Chieftain Mark III. Do you think the Leopard 1 is as good as those vehicles? It definitely isn't. But this is an issue with BR compression overall. But just looking at the statistics from that and looking at those two vehicles compared to the Leopard, there's no way in my head I can make an argument for the Leopard being equal to those two monsters. It also means that it doesn't get into those 9.0 games, which are new now, so we'll talk about that in a bit. So it keeps it out of that top tier rank 6 stuff, which is nice for us. One of the bizarre changes of this whole thing is the T-54 1947. So the T-54 1947 has always been at a lower BR, or at least recently, a lower BR than its other T-54 counterparts. And there's a very specific reason for this, and it's the fact that it gets different ammunition types. So even though they have the same gun, What the 1949 gets is a Sabo round which pens nearly 300mm, and the 1947 does not get this round. It only gets the APCR round, which pens 250. Now at 7.3, that's pretty much really underwhelming, and even at 7.7, with the Sabo round, that's pretty underwhelming too. You know, when everybody's chucking about Heat FS, and even the 1951 gets Heat FS. So, why are these three tanks at the same BR now? Or they're going to be at the same BR. Like, you can at least maybe make an argument the 49 and the 51 should be at the same BR. Like, there isn't that much difference. Like, the Heat FS does help the 51 a hell of a lot, but the 49 is still capable with its nearly 300mm Sabo. The 47 should be nowhere near this BR. Like, it should be at 7.0 or 7.3 like it is now. I don't really see the change. Why is it needed? Because now you can't run it with the IS-6. It's not as if its armor is that good. I mean, the front of it, it's like 200, 250 at most. Its turret can be annoying as hell to penetrate, and its sides are awful. They did actually change the model of its turret, so it's more sequential now. But it still doesn't matter. You're still only looking at about 200 to 250mm, which at 7.7 is nothing. Absolutely nothing. Like, let's just look at the new 7.7 vehicle, the Leopard 1, and look at its ammunition. 303mm of penetration stock on its Sabo. Hessia's 127, Heat FS 400. Like, I don't understand why they're putting this thing up. Like, as I said, it's literally the same vehicle as the other two, but it just has worse ammunition. Putting all of these things at the same BR just makes absolutely no sense to me. Like, just keep it where it is. I don't think it needs to be changed. You can make a really solid lineup at 7.3. IS-3, SU-12254, and now the T-54-47. Later, you can't do that. Why would you run this thing over the other T-54s? Why would you run the 49 over the 51? Who knows? Literally no reason to do that. But now, the 47 is just completely obsolete, which is really sad to see. And it also means the jump from the T-44-100 to the T-54s is that much greater. Probably because we're going to get like a 7.3 medium tank in the next patch. Maybe that's why they're boosting it. But still, it's not good enough. Its ammunition is not good enough for 7.7. If you run into any of the heavy tanks that it will see at 7.7, just remember, the Conqueror is 7.3 right now. The Vickers MBT is 7.0. It can't pen either of those. It can't pen the Chieftain, which is at 8.0. The Mouse, yeah, it's one of the only vehicles that probably can't pen the Mouse from the front at 7.7. It might be able to pen the turret cheeks. At 7.7 for the Americans, the M103, yeah, good luck with that. That's very troll armor it's got there. I mean, you might be able to pen it, but once again, it's now sequential armor, so that's going to be a bit of a buggery. So yeah, I don't think it needs to be raised. It just seems a bit odd to me. So anyway, we haven't even got onto the major changes. At 8.0, you know, nothing's really changed. What has happened is, though, that we have a new BR, so we have 9.0. Now, the reason why, or at least this is what I've been saying, I'm not sure if it's true or not, it might be true, who knows, but my belief is that the reason why 9.0 wasn't introduced straight after the update, or on the update 1.71, is because they wanted people to unlock the vehicles first, and then once enough people was able to unlock them, then they were going to increase everything up. So therefore, that would mean that there was a decent player base playing at 9.0, and they could actually get matches. So they've waited a few weeks after the update has dropped, and now what they're doing is they're giving it its own BR. So we now have comparable aircraft and tanks. They're both at 9.0 now, so, you know, Bob's your uncle. It also means that Rank 6 gets its own proper BR. The MBT-70, KPZ-70, T-64A, and the Chieftain Mark 10, all at 9.0, plus the Rakuten Jagdpanzer II Hot, which is seen as the best ATGM launcher in game, and I agree with that. It's pretty damn good, to be honest. So yeah, they're all going up, and that basically means that they can only face stuff down to 8.0, which I think is good. Because at 8.3 you have the M60A2, the Sheridan, the M60A1 AOS, Leopard A1A1, Rakuten Jagdpanzer 2, T10M, Swingfire, Striker, T55A, IT1, Chieftain Mark 5, Type 74, and also the M60A1 Rise. So these are 8.3, 8.7 vehicles. So I think this is a nice group that they have here. I think you could easily put a wall at like 8.0 or maybe 7.7, kind of what they've done artificially, and it does give you a nice selection of vehicles to choose from. Now, what I've heard from the M60A1 Rise is a lot of praise, the fact that it can eat shots and stuff like that, that's really nice. T55A, I'm not sure I'd put on the same pedestal as a lot of these other vehicles, especially the Rise. Chieftain Mark 5 has some issues, it needs an engine, please give it an engine. And then you've got the Swingfire and the Striker. Not exactly sure why they're at the same BR. I would actually drop the Swingfire to 8.0, I think that's fine to do. Don't understand why they've increased its BR. And of course the Japanese need rank 6, so they're stuck with only the Type 74, unfortunately. Hopefully this means that some of the complaining about the MBTs getting down-tiered kind of goes away. There's also been a reduction in the repair costs of these machines. Not surprised at all, same reason as I said before. They were waiting for enough people to get them. They wanted the dedicated players to, pay for them and use them. It makes sense. It makes sense in my head. But now all that's getting reduced, so we'll see more people play it, and it gives you a solidified rank 6 in the game. Now, whether you think, these tanks should be in the game or not, they are in the game, and therefore we have to talk about them. And at 9.0, I think that's the perfect place for them. In order to be comparable to the Jets, I think it's a good move. I think eventually, once we get a few more of these intermediary tanks between like World War II and, the 70s and 80s, we will get an increase in BR to 10.0, and maybe some of these vehicles will go away from where they are right now, because I still think, like, if you're in something like an M60A2 and you come up against the KPZ-70, it's really not a fair matchup. He does everything you do but better. Same with like the Leopard A1A1 and the T64A. They're not really nice matchups at all, but we just don't have the player base at the top levels to be able to reduce the BR matchmaking to like 0.7 or something. Because if you do that, like, there's only what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 tanks over the nations which would fight each other. And yeah, you can't do that. That's just not enough tanks. You'd need to really beef out rank 6 before you do that. But overall, I think it's a good change. We will be talking about it in some of the talks coming up, focusing mainly on stuff like rank 6, so I'll definitely get people's opinions on it. But overall, I agree with a lot of these changes. The T-54 I don't really agree with. I want to see how the Panzer III does. The Sturmil is irrelevant. And one of the vehicles I would like to bring up, which I've been playing a lot recently, is the T-44. The T-44 sits at 6.3 right now, which means that it constantly gets up-tiered into Tiger 2Hs, and with the armor buff on the Tiger 2Hs, it can't penetrate them. Like, it literally can't, even with its APCR rounds. The only one which can reliably penetrate a Tiger 2 is the APCR around the BR367P, which is a rank 4 upgrade. And if you are first, like, right now, if you're unlocking the T-44 and you want to use it, first of all, you have a bit of a dodgy lineup to put it with the IS-2 Mod 44, the ASU-85, and maybe the ZSU-37 if you feel like it, or the SU-122P, T-44-122, stuff like that. And the T-44 is just not very good, especially from a stock grind point of view. It feels to me like the Pershing did back in the day, when all it was doing was facing Tiger 2Hs all day, bouncing off that flat part of the turret, and you're just sat there just hating yourself and hating the game. So I would actually advocate for the T-44 being dropped to 6.0, just so it alleviates some of the pressure from the T44, and so it doesn't always go up against the Tiger 2Hs. If it gets into 5.0 matches, it can still easily be penetrated, and there isn't really something that makes the T44 good right now. It's just one of those in-between tanks, and it's just sad facing Tiger 2s constantly in it and just getting battered all day. But as I said, overall, I like the changes. It's going to be interesting to see how people adapt to the late tier stuff, but all the mid tier stuff seems pretty good. The T95, I mean, I don't agree with it, but I understand it. Maybe the T28 needs to be raised as well if we're using that logic. But anyway, this has been a pretty long one, so I'll leave you to your own devices, and I'll catch you next time.